When you want to conquer a people, you give them a myth. You get them to believe the myth. And then you have, through repetition, have them form the habit of believing the myth.
We've been trained to think about Europeans as our God. So we're at war with who? We're at war with God, because many of us believe in the white image of Jesus, and if that's his son, we know that his father must also be white. So are you trying to tell me we're at war with that?
The thing about being conscious and truthful is you gotta be tough, you gotta be ready to get violent, because people are always gonna try to take advantage of you, because if you're winning, they're losing. And those guys cheat and you don't. So they gotta know not to play with you. They gotta know you can't really think that you're just gonna have an opinion without some muscle.
We've also had the mindset of resistance. Even in Los Angeles here, a lot of gangs got started because they were combating the white supremacist groups that were targeting black people in certain neighborhoods. So street gangs were created to really battle them at first.
In the 60s, they banned martial artists. They had registration of people's hands and feet because it was something they didn't quite understand. And plus, when people came from the armed forces and started using karate, it was dangerous at that time.
In neighborhoods that are of a more upscale, financially affluent society, white, Jewish, etc., they are infused with fertility clinics. While in our societies, the ones that do not have that elevated level of economics, black and brown, impoverished communities, have abortion clinics.
The first revolution, Gil Scott-Heron tells us, is the revolution in the mind.
Welcome to the GILCHRIST Experience. That's Hidden Colors 5, coming out. It's coming out soon. At a theater near you. That's an exciting series. We've displayed on here quite a few of the items that motivate and move us and bring us our history, such as the one of the religion of white supremacy. The religion of white supremacy, which is Donald Trump's theme. How's it going, Leroy? You haven't been around in a couple of weeks.
It's been a challenging period and very successful for us as a people, in my estimation, because the more we see incidents, modern day lynchings, the more we can learn from them. They're actually teachable moments. And Spike Lee getting an Academy Award for the adaptation of the book to the Klansman film, that allows us to go back into the Klansman, which a lot of us did not see, because it wasn't, it just didn't have that pizzazz, so we thought. But that film is a very important film and well done by Spike Lee, well done. And we have the opportunity to teach off of it. Our young people do not know the history of our people, of America, in fact. And we have to use every opportunity to teach them. So when we see the Klansmen, Django, 12 Years a Slave, the Butler, all those films, the Green Book, all of those films have an opportunity for us to teach off of.
But do you think they took it seriously since it was so funny? I mean, it was really kind of funny.
The Klansmen?
Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying, it allows us to teach off of it.
Okay.
And regardless of how they portray the film, portray the subject matter, using that opportunity to explain not so much history, but the present. Because the Klansmen have morphed into the police departments around the nation.
Yeah, that's it.
And that was their plan. They're going to become legitimate. They're going to wear white shirts and shirt and tie and contribute to charities and whatnot. They are part of the society. They hide behind the badge to do their dirty work.
Well, you might mention that Donald Trump is the son of a Klansman.
He's representative of...
Somebody's calling you.
The Klansman.
The Klan is calling you.
That's right. He's representative of We cannot, I'm always saying this, you cannot look at Donald Trump as a singular individual and forget about the 6 million or whoever voted for him, but you have to look at him as a continuum, as an example of what is out there. He is a school teacher. He is a gym teacher. He is a track coach. He is all of those entities that we come into contact with. He's in charge of food distribution and making foods, processing foods. So I'm saying that in terms of the Donald Trumps is not that singular individual. He's reflective of the way a lot of them think. And today, and then I pass the mic on, what you have is, my perspective, is that they see in their minds their world going down, so ain't no need to smile and you know, pat you on the back. They just do what they do right out and say, you know, so what? And we are still looking at them to be benevolent, and that's not going to be. We have to unite across the board, meaning whether you're a Christian or this, an animist, it doesn't matter, because they don't ask what religion, what political party you belong to when they kill your daughter in a jail, when they rape your daughter on the side of the road. They do not. And we have to understand it, but then to have that point of view is to be a radical. And you got to be comfortable with that.
Since over the last 400 years, this planned genocide has been visited on us all these many years. It seems like we're getting further and further apart. What say you, Dr. Jeffries? You haven't been around in a while.
Well, I've been moving through the African world with power and dignity, and glad to be a part of it. I just came back from Selma this past weekend. Weekend before I was in Atlanta. Weekend before that I was in Washington, D.C. So wherever I move, it seems that African people are trying to move. So I don't have a dismal view of things.
Okay.
Before the light, there is the darkness. And so this is what is necessary as we move into a renaissance, a rebirth.
You see Donald Trump as a cleansing?
I see him as a necessary purging of evil that's in, not just in individuals, but institutions, and more importantly, it's systemic. So we're really dealing with systems. And if you focus on what's happening to us as individuals, you get a paralysis of analysis because it looks bad. These are the worst of times because of the condition our people find themselves in and because of their circumstances. But these are the best of times because of the potential we have for change and transformation and knowledge and understanding of where the world is going.
I read the book. It was the best of times.
Well, I want to take us back to Marcus Garvey, one of our famous true independents. We were talking about Malcolm last week, and how his father was a Garveyite.
And mother, father and mother.
Most of us that feel the independence, the first independence that we have as a people was Marcus Garvey's movement in the early 1900s. So I'll just give you a little biography of Marcus Garvey. Play item number 2. We'll be right back at you. This is Marcus Garvey, born August 8th?
August the 17th, 18th.
On the morning of August 3rd, 1920, 46-year-old Jacob Mills shined his boots, polished his sword, and headed to Harlem to take part in one of the biggest parades in New York's history.
As a young boy, to see my father in the parade was one of the greatest things in the world. I would be right there to see him put on his tunic, and I loved to see that sword that he carried. It really made me feel very proud of him.
Mills was one of 100,000 black people marching under the red, black, and green flag of the Universal Negro Improvement Association. The world had never seen anything like it. It was all the work of one man, Marcus Garvey.
Every window that you looked at, people's heads were out to see the Marcus Garvey parade. Most of them wanted to see Marcus Garvey. And he was very well decorated, his hats and the feathers, but he drove always in his automobile, sitting back.
At the age of 34, Garvey claimed millions of followers worldwide. His controversial goal, to create an independent black nation, made him one of the most powerful people in America and one of the most hated. The federal government targeted him as a threat to national security. Rival black leaders denounced him as a lunatic and a traitor to the race. But Garvey may have been his own worst enemy.
He wasn't one to take advice from others kindly. He made his own decisions, and he would rise or fall by the decisions that he made, because he was a supreme egotist.
Volatile and secretive, yet charismatic and visionary, Marcus Garvey changed forever the way black Americans looked at themselves and the world.
He started something that became bigger than Garvey himself. He, more than any other figure in the 20th century, symbolizes the turning of the perception of black people into something positive. Garvey's father was a mason, a professional mason. And among the things that he did was to create tombs for people in the St. Anne's Bay graveyard. He took Garvey with him to the graveyard one day, and they were digging this grave, and his father had Garvey go down inside the grave, but then he pulled the ladder up and left the child in the bottom of the grave. Garvey said that he cried out and his father wouldn't let him get back up out of the grave. He wanted to teach him a lesson.
Alone in the grave, young Marcus Garvey learned that he could rely on no one but himself. It was a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life.
Welcome back. I found that very powerful for a giant like that to come to America after I think he was a young man. I mean, he got here in 1918, something like that.
16, I believe.
Somewhere in
right
after. Anyway.
He got here thanks to Booker T. Washington.
Booker T. Washington died the year before he got here.
Right, but Booker T. Washington and the Tuskegee machine took on the U.S. government and fought to allow immigrants to come into America. And that included those immigrants who were building the Panama Canal, who should have had a right to come in because they were working for America. But the Americans put on the agenda an immigration law to keep out European Eastern European white people. They were against immigration from Europe. And someone said that since we want to keep the Europeans out, let's get a 2-for-1 and tack on the exclusion of Europeans, tack on the exclusion of African peoples, particularly those from the Caribbean. Booker T. Washington used his machine to block the U.S. government's attempt to do that. And he used all of his particular power to allow for Marcus Garvey to enter the United States and all the folks from the Caribbean who followed him. We got to deal with the history.
Okay.
So no one man does anything by himself. He's birthed by a woman. No man can nurture him with the breastfeeding. A woman does it. So we, by our very nature, are a communal, cooperative people. And so that there is a grave experience in the American African population and in the universal population, and it's called Freemasonry. And part of that experience is being lifted up out of the grave on a erected perpendicular with the help of others. So the lesson learned is that you do not and cannot do it by yourself. You have to do it with others. And when I met my grandfather, who had been murdered by the Klan, at the same time that Marcus Garvey was coming into these United States in 1917, my grandfather was murdered. When I finally did meet him after working with Alex Haley and for 4 or 5, I worked for Alex for 7 years, but when we finally finished Roots, the book, and we were working on the film, that was 1976. Alex asked me to come down because they're filming Roots, and I went down. I was there with Alex for a couple of weeks, and whenever there needed to be changes, he would say, wait a minute, let's talk to the expert. That was me. And then they made the changes. White folks got tired of me making changes on the Roots film. They sat me down for lunch, and they told me, Dr. Jeffries, we're glad to have you here to assist us, but we need to let you know that we bought the rights to the book Roots, and we're under no obligation to maintain the truth of the book, and we certainly don't have to deal with the truth of the African experience. Good white folks, Margolis, the head of the Roots filming enterprise, and an Englishman, Green, who was in charge of the African section, they sat me down and said, we don't care what degrees you have. We don't care what your experience is. We have a right to deal with your history. And that's the arrogance of the system of white supremacy that impacts white folks wherever they are, at whatever status they are. However, there is a greater force, there is a greater power, and it is the spirit of the Creator that Africans have always understood. And they haven't let the materialism of the process of world dominate the spiritualism. For the African, the spiritual dominates the material. For the northern cradle, the European, as Sheikh Anta Diop explained to us, for the northern cradle, cave people coming out of that environment, it is the material survival that dominates the spiritual. African culture, Native American culture, people who deal with nature, nature in the earth, nature in the sea, nature in the trees, nature in the universe. Their value system is the spiritual that dominates the material. And so I stayed with Alex. I'm a committed person. I stayed with him for a few more days. But after a while, when there was a scene of a slave ship, a cutaway in Brunswick, Georgia, a warehouse, they created a slave ship, and it was so real. Lou Gossett, myself, and others were over on the side watching this cutaway of a slave ship, and you had Africans stacked on the decks. And the trainer of the youth, who happened to be O.J. Simpson, the trainer of the youth was on the upper deck calling down to the lower deck, and Kunta Kinte was there moaning and groaning. And the trainer of the youth, O.J. Simpson, was saying, Kunta Kinte, you have to be strong. You have to eat, because we'll fight the white man to return to Mother Africa. Now, this was a high drama in film. And Lou Gossett and I and everybody was just, you had to be in tears on this circumstance. And then Green ran out and said, cut. And we wondered, why would they cut? They need to continue. This is a flow. And the cut was, we do not want Return to Mother Africa in this film. And once that happened, that was it for me. I had to get out of there, and Spirit told me, call your auntie that raised your father and find out where. Well, Spirit said, go to your grandfather's grave. I said, grandfather, I don't know my people in Georgia. I don't know anything about that. Virginia, yes. My mother raised me with the Virginian family tradition. So I called Aunt Bessie to find out where was her father buried and where was my grandfather buried. She said, we're from Ohio. I said, Aunt Bessie, nobody's from Ohio. We migrated out of Georgia to Ohio. Where in Ohio? And then she got my drift. Your grandfather is buried in Midway Church Cemetery, Jasper County, Kelly, Georgia, near Monticello. I left Alex after a few more days, never told him why I had to leave him. I had to restore myself. I had been devastated. No degrees, no experience, no $1 million white boy education could put me back together again. Humpty Dumpty, black as I am, fell off the wall and he wasn't getting up again except for Spirit. And what happened was, when I went to that grave and discovered my grandfather in the grave, the graveyard in Georgia, the tallest tombstone was my grandfather. It was up to my chest. And that tallest tombstone in the graveyard was a Tekken. It was a symbol of resurrection and rebirth. And on it were his vital statistics. Jesse Jeffries, born August the 10th, 1868, died July the 14th, 1917. And on it were the twin pillars of Masonry. It is a real experience in our culture, the Masonic movement, the Brotherhood movement that Africans began eons ago, that you go through the process of death and resurrection. Well, what was the point? It is in the grave, that grave process that's in Masonry has
well, you're saying the lesson that he was being taught, being left in a grave overnight as a child.
I don't know what the father was doing with his happening. I'm saying the graveyard experience and resurrection out of the grave to a stand-up perpendicular.
I thought you were tying the Masonic order into this initiation of him being left in a grave overnight.
I don't know whether there's a tie-in. I would be interested to know that. I'm saying, but the graveyard experience and coming up out of the grave for the African tradition that we've adopted from the ancient tradition is that you come up with the assistance of others. And so you're not a man by yourself. I was saying in my opening statement, Marcus Garvey was not a single person. He could not have walked into America with his ideas and led black people. We were already moving when he came in and brought another. We were marching. We already had the parades. We already had the drumming. Our churches marched on Sunday. And we already had militarily marched up Fifth Avenue. And that was before Marcus Garvey came. We led the victory parade in 1918 up Fifth Avenue. 369. Because the 369th, those brothers who had fought and gave their life possibly being poisoned because mustard gas and all of that. They were known as the Harlem Hellfighters. Yeah. The whole regiments and whatnot were given the Croix de Guerre, the French Cross. They marched up Fifth Avenue, leading the American Victory Parade. It had thousands of white men after them, and they marched with French regimental form, with French instruments and French uniforms. And when they got to 110th Street, they did not stop where the parade stopped. They marched into Harlem. So marching is a part of our culture. On Sundays, our churches march, and our organizations march. They marched in their Masonic uniforms, etc. We can give Marcus Garvey credit for bringing a global perspective that he brought, but let's not make our move, our resurrection around the Marcus Garvey period in the hands and minds and heart of one man. It's something that's more significant than that.
You know, a seed, if you want something to grow, you have to plant. And a seed has to be planted in the ground. So it has to go into the darkness. It has to be buried. But somehow, in that small tomb of the seed, life is given back. That seed germinates and it comes up. You take an apple, and I ask kids, what's this? They say, it's an apple. I said, all right. I cut it open, I take the seed out. What's this? They say, it's a seed. No, it's an apple orchard. From that one seed, you can grow a tree and get tens of thousands of seeds and apples. So the seed goes into the ground. And in time, it gives birth. It rises, excuse me, it takes root, it grows tall, it grabs the sunlight, it provides shade for one who might be weary. It may provide the material that you need to build a house. So everything is interdependent. No man is self-made. No. We are truly interdependent. You talk about roots, and I was in Kunta Kinte's house about 9.5, 10 years ago. I was in the Gambia in his house with his great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaughter. I stood in the dungeon where he was held before he was brought here.
Right.
When I got to the Gambia, I was a guest of President Jammeh, and I stepped off the plane. I knelt down on the ground and kissed the soil. And I told the people, you know where you're from. I don't. I have no idea. And you can't leave here running to Europe and running to America and forsake the land that you have, knowing who you are. It is so important. And that movie really hit my son when he was growing up, watching that movie. And he was analyzing, at a young age, he was analyzing the characters in the movie. But our folks, my mother's family, my great-grandfather and his sons worked in the canal zone, in the building of the Panama Canal. They came here around 1912 from Panama. He was a carpenter in Barbados, master carpenter, went to the Panama Canal with his sons, and then they came here from Panama. My wife's family is from Panama. That immigration matter. Ben Franklin wrote, and I'm going to get this stuff and bring it in for you so you can post it. God forbid that we have the Germanic people, the Italians, and he named various people, the Irish and the Scots. He said, God forbid that they should come here and nestle in this great land, because all of them had black blood. He only wanted the pure white people. Adolf Hitler wasn't the first one to come up with this Aryan notion. Ben Franklin wrote about it in the 1700s because black people had run Saxony. Black people were kings in Bulgaria, in Russia. There were czars in Russia who were black. There were kings of Scotland and Ireland. King James from the King James Bible had black blood. He's written of in their records. He wasn't white. So Ben Franklin didn't want specific groups of people coming in from Europe because they weren't white. And what they did in Europe, what they did in the British Islands, there was a ship called the Veteran. And following a war with the Scottish kings and the Brits, they rounded up all the blacks of Scottish heritage and shipped them to the West Indies in the 1500s. Not as slaves. These were artisans. They shipped them out of Europe and then started to whiten up all the pictures and all the records. But that was why. And this country, I had the records of all of the countries where, I went online a few years ago looking at where did the people come from. And you can see they were particular as to who they wanted, the numbers of people, and by every country around the world. And you can see when you go to Africa, they had the smallest representation in immigration in this country.
All right, what I was getting at with this Marcus Garvey's piece, last week we went over the errors of Malcolm. And I saw in this piece here him being left in a grave overnight. And this teaching him not to trust people. And that was his biggest shortcoming. And what I'm trying to do is to bring to our attention the great leaders that we've had and how, what were their shortcomings? How much greater could it have been without that experience? You know, what could possibly happen? So it can help us with what's happening today. All right? So what I want to show next is another supposedly immigrant, a a person that led this country for 8 years, and I thought we'd study my hero, Barack Obama. And we haven't talked about him for a while, and I want to talk about how he was treated for the 8 years that he was president. And as a result, we have Donald Trump. All right? So run number 5 for me, and we'll come right back at you.
We're going to have a new United States Senator, and his name is going to be Barack Obama. Thank you very much.
He's the highest-ranking black elected official in the country.
I don't know about you, but I'm still fired up.
Barack was trying to struggle through issues of racial identity.
Hey, baby. How's everybody doing?
His mother was white. His grandparents were white. He wanted to fit into black culture.
He didn't have that, I'm going to Wall Street to make a ton of money. He wanted to do something that made a difference.
Love you guys.
The day is going to come, and there'll be bigger and better things for Barack Obama.
How are you? Good to see you. God bless you.
July 27, 2004, Boston, Massachusetts. The Democratic National Convention was in its second day. By now, some of the party's heaviest hitters had already taken the stage. But this night, the keynote speaker was a newcomer to national politics. His name was Barack Obama. The 42-year-old was the Democratic nominee for the Illinois seat in the U.S. Senate. Giving an unknown and unproven candidate a spot on the podium was a risky move.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
But party leaders believed Obama was someone who could breathe new life into their party.
Tonight, we gather to affirm the greatness of our nation. There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America. There is not a black America and a white America and Latino America and Asian America. There's the United States of America.
To many, Barack Obama had burst onto the national stage out of nowhere. What few people understood was that Obama had spent a lifetime preparing for this moment. In his struggle to understand himself and his place in American society, Obama had traveled around the globe. He had risen from an itinerant childhood to the inner circles of the political elite. In 1988, Barack Obama arrived in the quiet village of Alego, Kenya, situated on Lake Victoria. This was his father's hometown. The name Barack, which in Swahili means blessed, was also his father's. But Obama had little else to connect himself to the man he'd never really known.
Yeah, I think Barack had a real longing to figure out who his father was, to help him with his own identity.
One night, Obama knelt by his father's headstone. His experiences in Africa were beginning to help him understand the man who'd left his family over 25 years ago. According to Obama, he began to cry. In 1959, at the age of 23, Barack's father arrived in the United States from Kenya to study math and economics at the University of Hawaii in Honolulu.
His parents worked very hard to give him opportunity for a better education, and he was bright enough to be rewarded a scholarship.
There were few black men on campus and no other Africans. Shortly after starting classes, he caught the eye of a student named Ann Dunham.
She was very much a romantic individual. Her head was in the clouds, and she could be extremely naive. She seemed a very caring and very compassionate woman.
In the early 1960s, interracial relationships were extremely rare, and in many states, interracial marriage was illegal. But that didn't stop them from falling in love. Anne's parents, who also lived in Honolulu, tried to be open-minded about their daughter's choice.
Their acceptance was a function of their love and their trust of their daughter's decision-making process.
After a discreet wedding ceremony, the couple settled in Honolulu. In 1961, Barack Obama was born.
Another one of our great leaders. I see this as a blessing from God. I mean, I always thought an interracial mind, you know, I always thought integration would work. You know, I was from New York. It's completely different here in New York, for me anyway. But I saw Barack as being a blessing from God. I really did. I thought he would, I know how evil the system is, but I thought for some reason justice would prevail. Now we see a good 10 years later, we're stuck with Donald Trump in the White House. And it's become a new cleansing. Now I think 2020 might turn into another Barack Obama type scene where the good people of America will unite and bring somebody forth that'll do some good for everybody.
Cory Booker?
No, not Cory Booker. I
don't
don't know who yet, but might be a combination of, you know, a couple of people. I don't know. I'd love to see Stacey Adams in there somewhere.
Well, that's not going to happen.
She's not running.
I know.
Kamala Harris, former
see her?
Former Attorney General for State of California, a senator, sharp attorney.
But her background is being questioned.
Right.
She's a talented person. She's made her contribution. But on the mother side, it's East Indian. In other words, from India.
And the father's
side is Jamaican.
Right.
The partner for life is a European American.
Right.
So that's going to drain off any successful vote getting that she would get. You would think that maybe more whites would gravitate to her and maybe more Asians, but that's not necessarily the case because India, for example, has a terrible caste system.
Right.
And if she's related to a non-caste, then she's in the category. So what we're trying to say is things are much more complicated than we would like to understand.
Who do you see out there?
No, what I see is a system. I say it, I've been teaching it for 50, 60 years. If you do not understand systems analysis, then everything else you think you understand will work against you. Barack Obama was not produced by his circumstances of his background and that mixture that he is a product of. He was produced by a system that saw the potential of using a black man to carry out their program. Now we have to ask, who were the people who financed him? Who were the people that prepared him? The offers that he got, I got in 1955. He wasn't even born when I got the offers from that group that saw the potential in me. There was no congressman in New Jersey. There wasn't even an Italian congressman in New Jersey. The Irish controlled the Congress seats in New Jersey.
Right.
And the Italians were next in line to inherit that. Black people were further down the line. But there were some people who realized they were leaving the urban areas and going out into the suburbs, and they needed somebody in the urban areas could manage their interests. And they offered me the Congress seat. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I appreciate the offer, but I want to be the lawyer to fight for civil rights and save the race. My model is Thurgood Marshall, okay? That same process of other powerful people selecting the black person who's going to be their champion. We have to understand that exists now. It's going on now. They will make the same choices in terms of which part of the black community fits into their system. He was picked by the system. His father was picked by the system. Tom Maboya, who was one of the leaders, young leaders of Kenya, and Jomo Kenyatta, who was one of the old leaders of Kenya, were in a struggle in 1959. The Mau Mau movement had scared the European to death because these people in the 50s were fighting for their homeland, and they were willing to die for it. And the white folks took their sacred homeland and chased them off of it, and they claimed it to be the white highlands for white folks. So Kenya, but in the mix of Tom Mboya, Jomo Kenyatta, comes my hero. I didn't realize he was in the mix, but Thurgood Marshall was in the mix. He had done the work in '54 with the Supreme Court decision. He had been well trained by Howard University's great scholars. He had a strategy, but he also had a global consciousness. And in '59, when Barack Obama's father came on that of students coming into America, Thurgood Marshall was in London with Jomo Kenyatta and the others at Lancaster House with the leaders of England discussing Kenya's independence. And the person who had led the civil rights struggle legally was now leading the African nation-building struggle. Thurgood Marshall was there to provide the legal mind that they needed. So when they finally got the independence, '63, Thurgood Marshall was there, invited by Jomo Kenyatta to help them celebrate independence. That's the African system working. But the European system was not supposed to, that was not supposed to be. Jomo Kenyatta was not supposed to come out of his circumstance and situation. And he was slated to die. In fact, one of my great mentors, physical mentor, whose shoulder I stand on, Ambassador Dudley Thompson, who was born January 19th, 1917, the day I lost my grandfather physically in death. In that year, I got this, Dudley Thompson was born from parents who helped to build the Panama Canal. His father, they were Jamaicans who went to build the Panama Canal. His father was a teacher. And Dudley Thompson eventually, when the canal process was over, came back and was raised in the Westmoreland section of Jamaica. Eventually, he got this education from his father and mother. They were both educated. And eventually, he became a leader of Jamaica's youth. He became an Air Force pilot. Like we had the Tuskegee pilot, the British created pilots. Professor Scobie, who was my partner for 25 years, was an Air Force pilot. And him and Dudley Thompson were there in 1945 at the Manchester Conference. And they participated as you know, that was a part of their, they were too young to be there. But who was there? Jomo Kenyatta was there. Who was there? W.E.B. Du Bois was the head of the conference. Who was there? The secretary was Kwame Nkrumah. Who was there? Padmore from Guyana, Ross McConnell, Padmore from Trinidad and Tobago, Ross McConnell from Guyana. Who was there? The wife of Marcus Garvey. So it's this 1945 Pan-African Conference that pulled all of these folks together with a Pan-African vision. It didn't make any difference whether they came from a Marxist angle or a nationalist angle. They were there to decide what was going to be the fate of Africa. In October, November 1945, white folks put their system together months before in San Francisco. They met in San Francisco in June. White folks from all over the world. How can we put our system back together again? It collapsed. It collapsed with World War II and 100 million white folks. I don't know how many millions of white folks being killed. You have World War I, the white folks are killing each other, white on white crime by the millions. Then you have a period of 10 years of two great growth. That was the Roaring 20s. And then the whole system collapsed in the Depression. And it didn't come out of it until
today.
Well, that's what I'm trying to get to. Okay. The system today is not built on one man.
Tell me
the
how
system today is not built on a grave experience. The system today is built on economics, which is your creative, productive capability, politics, your management capability, and you put in politics to manage your economics, and culture, which determines what type of economics you're going to have and who's going to do your politics. Right. That's the system that we're working with from eons of time. That's the system that's still at work. It's not individual. It's not a grave experience. It's people sitting down and plan, how do we keep the economics in our hands? How do we develop a political structure to manage that economics? How we develop a culture structure that says that we're superior to the others. That's why we manage the world's economics.
Why couldn't we present to Obama this system analysis? Why couldn't we work closer to Obama when he was in the White House?
Because we're too involved in our individual circumstances. We're too involved in our personal analysis. We're too involved in trying to be a Trinidadian and don't care about the Tubagonians, and trying to be a Jamaican, not a Jamaican in Jamaica, on Kenya, but a Jamaican from Montego Bay, and trying to be a Negro from North Carolina and Georgia, and not African from New York. That's right. So we have to find a Pan-African formula. Dr. Clark said it best: Pan-Africanism or perish.
When Obama was in the White House, we was in there for 8 years. We fought.
We didn't put him in there.
I mean, you guys.
We just put him in there. President of black people. He's the president of the United States.
He had a position that we could have worked with a little better than we did.
He got elected on our vote.
Exactly.
He didn't get elected on a West Indian vote or Kenyan vote or vote from Asia. He got elected on a vote of black people. The margin of his victory was black folk coming to the poll, standing in line for hours in the rain, standing in line with
system analysis for Barack Obama to save us. He was there to save us.
No one man is going to save you. See, that's the whole thing.
Well, you can't talk about somebody saving you. What are you doing? The night that Barack Obama was elected, and I think we all know where we were that night, just as we all knew where we were when Martin Luther King was assassinated, or John Kennedy. I'm coming home, my wife and I are coming home from a gathering in Manhattan, and I stopped at a store to get something, and people are celebrating, and the brother standing there, his pants are hanging down like almost to his knees. Hey, we got a black president. I said, yeah, brother. I said, you see how that brother carries himself?
Right. There you go.
I said, do you think you could pull your pants up and cover your derriere and give some respect to yourself and to the rest of our people?
Right. Exactly.
He said, you know, you're right. Well, I'm not always right, but the thing is this. We have a mentality that says, what are you going to do for me? I remember Minister Farrakhan at the Million Man March said, don't worry about what the white man is doing. What are you doing?
That's right. There you go.
All right?
There you go.
It wasn't Barack Obama's job to lift black people up out of whatever. That wasn't his job.
We had the chance to write an agenda and take it to him.
No. Every man needs to sit down in his home and handle his business. Every man needs to raise his children.
Well, you need an example.
That was an example. He's not. If you think that Barack Obama was the first example of black manhood and fatherhood, I don't know what you're looking at. The examples are there. It's not his job, and it ain't my job to lift the entire black race out of a condition when the fact is it comes down to the individuals, the group. If you blow the trumpet and people don't respond to the trumpet, how do you get them to move? One man, Marcus Garvey, had all those people, right?
Now, what was his shortcoming?
He was done in by the FBI.
No, he didn't trust anybody.
No, that's not true. How could you produce a global movement and you didn't trust anybody?
You said it was moving on.
He couldn't do it in Jamaica. He couldn't do it in Central America. But he came to America where there was a myriad of different black folk from different places, and he was able to do it. And then he inspired people in South Africa and on the African continent. So how can you focus on a negative thing? Negativity and positivity exist side by side. You have to weigh him, the positive with the negative. And the negative outweighs. No, it does not outweigh. Maybe in some people's mind, the positive outweighs. That's why he was able to stand and still stand as a spirit force of people coming together. He inspired Nkrumah. He inspired, you can't give Nkrumah the credit for thinking he had this great vision. And Nkrumah came to the United States to be a preacher. But he had come to the United States in which black people were interested in Garvey because he's not the first who talked about Pan-Africanism. He didn't bring it. He liked Booker T. Washington's self-development. So do your own thing. Build your own, control your own institutions.
And he got these ideas from Booker T.
He was inspired by Booker T, but the ideas that he involved, he took Booker T's ideas, he took somebody else's ideas, he took his own experience, and then he synthesized them into this global thing that we are a race of people that are the foundation race of the human family, and we can do for self.
Putting this discussion together has to be the realization that our quest for freedom, justice, and equality never left us on the shores of Africa when we were brought over here.
Okay.
It existed. It came through David Walker's appeal.
Yes,
right?
1830.
That was one of them. And they're the slave revolts. See, we don't even know how many slave revolts there were.
Hundreds of them.
And the fact is, these were black people fighting a resistance war against people who are totally diabolical to our existence. And rather than look at differences, we have to look at where and reason together as to where and how we can work out of the situation that we're in.
Okay,
what I hear
okay.
Brother Jeffries saying is exactly true, opposite of what the guy was saying in the narrative. Our brother Barack Obama was selected and placed in a position
to be elected.
To be elected. And the context of that time was, remember, there was an anti-war movement going on. And he was going to be the savior not only for, quote, black people, but for the anti-war movement. And that was a huge movement that was taking place, and they had no other leader, quote, leader, except for Barack Obama. So he stepped into a vacuum. Now, what happened after that is subject to analysis. And yeah, there are people who said that Barack Obama didn't do anything, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time, there's a reality that the Republicans set out to sabotage his administration from the
Day one.
Before the inauguration.
They announced it.
They said it, yeah.
They said
They
it.
announced it.
I think the guy's name is Draper, and he writes about what they were talking about at that meeting. This is a reality. At the same time, Barack Obama had people around him who were making decisions and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I did have
How much
the
sugar
benefit.
follow do you think that he got from black people because his mother was white?
None at all.
Oh, come on.
None at all.
Come on.
Black people.
None at all. So my grandmother is half white. What am I going to feel bad about him?
Sharpton said he wasn't black enough. Charles Rangel worked against Barack Obama and then jumped on
You
him.
haven't heard me say anything about him in reference to them. You haven't heard me say anything in reference to him, certainly not in reference to color. There might have been people who were opposing him because he was raised above and past the black leadership. And the people who did it knew they did it because they have a process in their system. Whenever there's a problem, go to black. When they tried to set up a nation, they had to go to black. When they tried to colonize this nation in 20, they had to go to black. And black people came on the rising. They were here in 1607. They couldn't even handle the native peoples. The native peoples tried to help them. They realized these people were not correct. So the native people said, you're going to stand on your own. And they were starving. And a starving Virginia colony was saved by 20 Africans taken off of a Dutch man of war that had pirated Africans heading to the Caribbean. Those 20 saved the American colony. Right. When they established the nation, they were in trouble because the British had told black folks in 1775, if you leave the damn plantations and you join our side, we'll arm you and you can fight for freedom. So thousands, tens of thousands, left the plantations. And Jefferson and Washington looked up and said, oh my God, we're going to lose it because our plantations, we may count the receipts and whatnot, but the planters, the agriculturalists, the masons, all of them are black people. And so they actually, Washington was forced, Jefferson rewrote the Declaration of Independence and put in there the possibility of people getting their freedom. And then in order to save so many of our people leaving, they actually recruited 5,000. That was it. They recruited 5,000 into the Revolutionary Army. The British already had 35,000 of us were on the British side.
And don't forget, Hanson was the first president
of the Continental Congress.
The Continental Congress.
That's
he
right.
preceded George Washington.
That's right.
All right? George Washington was not the first president. This is like 76, before
Before 76.
Right.
Before,
when they had the,
well, not during the war.
Yeah.
It was not during the war. It was after the war. But Hanson Place is named after him in downtown Brooklyn.
Right.
By the big clock.
Right. Because for
on
the
Hanson
first
Place.
7 or 8 years, you had the Confederation. You did not have a United States. They finally realized that these systems analysis, these many states, these many colonies, states are not going to make it. They need to have a systems process. And what moved the United States into real economic, political, and cultural power was the Haitian Revolution. And the Haitian Revolution beat back.
Purchase.
Okay.
And the Haitians are still paying for that to this very day.
That's right. To this very day, they are paying for it. So I'm saying, let's look at the history writ large.
Can you focus on this?
And
no.
Come on, man.
You haven't seen this. You're talking about your boy, Booker T. Washington.
Yeah. So there were
the only black man on a U.S. coin.
There were
in the history of the country.
In our politics that were envious that Barack was lifted up by the power brokers past black leadership. So there was a resentment. But in general, there was an excitement by black people that there's a possibility. But he was put in place to save a dying ship. He produced a miracle.
They didn't think he would make it.
My
That's right.
observation,
That's
they
right.
weren't only jealous, but they were in the pocket of Hillary Clinton. In Harlem.
Right.
We have to look at the
That's right.
The only black political leader
I forgot about that.
to throw in for
Bill
Barack
Perkins.
Obama was Perkins.
Bill Perkins.
And he's always
Bill
been
Perkins.
like on the fringe and the outside of these guys in the nucleus. And the context, what was happening around the time of an event, whether you look at Garvey, whether you look at David Walker, whether you look at anyone, that you have to look at the context, and then you get a picture. Otherwise, we just talking about individuals, man.
And you get a paralysis of analysis.
When I finally began to read Garvey's Philosophies and Opinion, he gives a definition for the NAACP. I'm reading this thing, I said, oh man. And he puts it in context. So,
and with that,
we gotta go.
That's part one. We'll be here for part two. We'll be here for part two. Hey.
For more of the Gilchrist experience.
Hey.
The God in me loves the God in you.
Yes. And Wakanda forever.
Wakanda forever. Power to the people.
And Black Power.
We got another
Thank you,
minute
Gil,
for
for having a program. And folks turning the dial. Who are these Negroes saying talk? Because they don't hear.
Everybody's surprised.
They don't hear a forthright discussion, whether we are right or wrong, of black men on TV.
Discussing history.
That's right.
And the whole reason of showing these shortcomings of our gracious leaders is that we don't make the same mistake and learn from other people's mistakes.
But we can have our mistakes corrected, but if we don't understand the system, everything else that you think you're doing is not going to get you where you're supposed to go.
I think we could work better with Obama, with the system that we have.
J. Edgar Hoover undermined everything that Marcus
That's
Garvey
right.
was doing.
That's right.
Power to the people, and stay tuned for more.
He was a right.
That was
we'll be back next.
Come back here.
No, we'll be back next week, part two.
Power to the people.
Got to read black newspapers.
J. Edgar Hoover
got to read.
That's right.
Broke more federal laws than anybody in the history of the country. He undermined every black leader Hoover went after.
Right.
Every black leader.
Now, now that we're off the air, now that we're off the air,